The Sweet Spots, or Stop Being Stupid, Part 25, by Anna von Reitz, reading from annavonreitz.com. The value of the money in your pocket depends on oil. Think about that statement for a full minute. Really think. Oil is the commodity asset backing the corporate funny money called the United States dollar, USD, styled as all capital letters. That is why it is also known as the petrodollar. The value of your labor is tied to oil. The value of your house is tied to oil. The value of your land is tied to oil, and so is the cost of your food, your education, your medical care, and everything else you can think of. It's been that way since 1971, but somehow the news still hasn't come home to Main Street. When Nixon changed the asset-based backing of the United States Incorporated, styled as all capital letters, currency to oil instead of silver, your fundamental well-being and prosperity became inextricably linked to oil, and it will remain that way until we, and that means Americans and U.S. citizens alike, find a new way forward. So let's look at the logic and the end result of Tricky Dick's gamble. We have become the largest per capita consumers of energy on the planet. We have also become by far the far richest per capita country if we include the value of managed trust assets. Nixon's move to the petrodollar has fundamentally changed the way we live and has fueled the technical revolution and made globalization possible. It has also caused wars and numerous police actions, governmental corruption, pollution of the environment, and growing social unrest. You have to account for both, the good and the bad. Now, new technology is threatening the oil market. Free energy, electrical generators are coming online, and they will inexorably bring their changes to the planet and to the commodity markets of the world too. We'll no longer have to depend on the grid and no longer have to fuel giant coal, gas, and diesel turbines to push electrons through millions of miles worth of electrical cable lines. New modes of transportation won't be far behind. The transition of the whole world to the use of these new energy devices won't come overnight, but it will come. There will continue to be demand for fossil fuels, but not like it is today, and slowly but surely the industry that has been compared to an 800-pound gorilla in a glass factory will fade away. 100 years from now, our children's grandchildren will look back on big oil and our present nuclear power generation process the same way we look at the whale oil industry. Something odd and best left forgotten, except for a sporadic rereading of Moby Dick. In our case, Atlas Shrugged. That's what's coming, and it's good. We need to embrace it, and we have no choice in the matter anyway. Other countries not as blessed with energy resources like China and Japan, countries with large impoverished populations like India and most of Africa, and countries with topography ill-suited to the conventional electric grid development like Peru, have powerful economic and practical reasons to develop free energy, and we can't blame them or stop them from doing so. As a result of the development of free energy, mankind as a whole will be released from the burden of supporting utility companies. The wholesale pollution of the atmosphere will cease, and we will no longer have disasters like Exxon Valdez, BP Deep Horizon, and Fukushima to worry about. As with any commodity market, the supply versus demand curve for oil follows a hyperbolic curve. Along that curve, at each point, is a sweet spot where supply and demand are in alignment. The Saudi government has long had a grasp of this mathematical relationship and can peg their output to their best price relative to demand for oil within a hair's breadth. There's another sweet spot that exists on the consumer side of the equation, where we cut our demand for a commodity to realize our best price. Americans are both the greatest consumers of fossil fuel energy on the planet in terms of refined oil products, the greatest long-term producers of refined fossil fuels. For us, then, there are two sweet spots of concern. When we cut our consumption of fossil fuel, our demand, in other words, we drive the cost down in our role as consumers, but we suffer in our role as producers. For us, the oil economy is a yin-yang proposition where maximizing overall benefits demands balancing both our demand and our supply. Let me submit that while the crude oil producers of the world have precise control of supply, no remotely similar effort has been made to balance and analyze, much less control, demand. As the energy market shifts and changes and the free energy comes online, it will be of exponential benefit for all concerned if our country focuses on intelligent, conscious, and long-term energy consumption, as well as energy production policies, more efficient use of energy, better deployment and diversification of fuel choice options, better fuel delivery systems, and investment in the fuel economy measures like public transportation all make sense. The entry of free energy technology into the marketplace and the environmental, social, and economic challenges of making this transition requires no less of us. It all has to balance out, and over time the dependence of the United States dollar, styled as all caps, on oil assets has to change along with everything else. So against this vast and changing worldwide energy market background, we have to consider the Keystone and Dakota Access pipelines. America has been blessed with vast natural resources of fossil fuels, but thanks to policies set in place in the early 1900s, the majority of these resources have never been developed. Only recently have the oil and gas reserves of the Midwest been tapped. The pressure to do so has been the result of both increased price gouging by Middle Eastern suppliers of crude oil to our refineries and the realization that long-term value of the resources is no longer increasing. Instead, we're facing a use-it-or-lose-it market. Building both the Keystone XL and the DAPL pipelines in such an environment is a no-brainer, and time is of the essence. That is, if Americans want to keep eating and staying warm in the winter and be able to bootstrap their way forward. Because of our own natural resource development policy circa 1908 was against the development of our own resources, let the other guy develop his resources and let us buy them for pennies on the dollar while keeping our own reserves. A great amount of anti-development propaganda has been used over the years, and not a little fear-mongering to curtail American resource development. Now suddenly that has to change. We all need to understand why, and we all have to make the change, at least when it comes to hauling our gas and oil reserves out of the ground and making use of them. I want to point out that I'm an Alaskan, and our Trans-Alaska Pipeline, TAPS, has functioned perfectly for going on 50 years and is still pumping oil cleanly, efficiently, and without spills, through some of the most challenging and remote country on Earth. It is a living testimony to American engineering skill and what is possible when we make safe, efficient pipeline design and operations our goal. Neither the Keystone XL nor the DAPL pipeline represent anything like the challenges presented by TAPS, and they're being proposed using today's engineering materials and monitoring systems, not those available 50 years ago. If TAPS can do its job in Alaska for going on 5 decades, there's no reason to think that Keystone XL and DAPL, which is much smaller diameter, can function safely and efficiently for the 20 or 30 years they need to function during a worldwide energy source transition. If there are concerns about river crossings and spills in aquifers, we can put pipelines inside of pipelines, build in shutoff and double shunting valve systems, and we already have state-of-the-art computerized monitoring systems capable of constant online monitoring of modern pipeline installations, so that the moment there's any pressure loss anywhere in the system, the alarms go off and the valves shut down. Even if there's an earthquake, a dam, or a bridge collapse, or other disaster that impacts a modern pipeline, the entire system is designed to shut down, just like an electric space heater is designed to shut down if they fall over. As for the DAPL route, crossing sacred ground, well, the native groups will have to consider whether or not the economic benefit is worth disturbing Earth Mother or not. If not, we will have to find another route and other people will benefit, but it is sure that the environmental danger of doing what we're doing now, which is shipping massive amounts of needed crude oil to East Coast refineries via train cars, is far, far greater than building a pipeline to do the same thing. Those who watch the movie Unstoppable, based on a true story, will have a sense of what carrying gas and oil products by rail can mean. Three things are certain. The value of the U.S. currency is now totally based on oil and oil derivatives. The long-term value of the oil and gas reserves in the ground is going downhill. And all the people on the East Coast need affordable fuel and jobs. Those considerations add up to the fact that, rerouted or not, DAPL needs to be built. Both from our perspective as consumers and as producers, the need to access gas and oil for use on the East Coast is apparent. The efficient use of idle East Coast refinery capacity to free up Gulf and West Coast refineries for export volume is less obvious, but just as important. We have to hit both sweet spots, produce refined oil products for export, and consume our own oil for lower cost energy at home while there is still need for large volumes of oil and gas. We need to do this to grubstake our way into the future, to reinvest in other assets backing the United States dollar, to enable a large shift in our long-term investment and development strategies, to bring our country into alignment with the valid needs of the rest of the world for cheap energy and a clean environment, and to provide energy for our own use during the 20 to 30 year transition. Bear in mind that our super fastidious permitting process commonly takes twice as long as the actual engineering and building of a pipeline, and that building a pipeline like the Keystone XL can easily take 4 years of actual construction. Now set that against a viable market life of 20 to 30 years, and you begin to see that we're in a time crunch, a veritable race to make it to the market while there is a market. The situation in the Middle East, China, and elsewhere is not much different, owing to the fact that everyone on earth is more or less dependent on the value of the United States dollar, which is tied to oil and gas. The other countries can't sell off bonds and other investment in USD without devaluing their own investments. They have every reason in the world to cooperate with us in developing and implementing new asset bases for U.S. currency. The easiest transition in terms of finding additional and or alternative asset backing for a common currency is to come back whence we came. American state nationals need to restore the proper functioning of the actual state governments and to convene an actual Continental Congress as opposed to the corporate version in Washington, D.C., to mandate reissuance of the American silver dollar, USD, styled as all lowercase. This will form a basis for the United States to trade with both the American states and the BRICS nations in a mutually beneficial way and ease the path forward. We are not alone in facing this transition, but as the USD is based on oil asset backing, we are in a particularly exposed position. If we don't move off the dime and make use of the common sense and natural resources we are heir to, we will miss the boat. Science and progress march onward. The self-interested delay in the development of free energy caused by J.P. Morgan, James Clerk Maxwell, and George Westinghouse has lasted a century. The Chinese, Russian, and Indian governments are all here to tell us that it won't be tolerated anymore. The world needs free energy, and it needs clean energy. Average mom-and-pop Americans need free energy as much as anyone else, and are depending upon the federal government to find the sweet spots, the means to move forward and make a smooth transition to new asset backing for the USD, maximize current export opportunities or refinery capacities, provide abundant affordable fuel at home, and do all this while maintaining the overall value of the United States dollar. My assessment, it's a tall order, but it can be done, and it's already clear that this is the path that Donald Trump is on. See this and over 700 others on Anna's website at annavonreitz.com. The domain is spelled ANNAVONREITZ.com. Support her work by giving generously through the PayPal. Interregnum my rump, or Stop Being Stupid, Part 26. Reading from annavonreitz.com. There is no so-called interregnum, yet another specious idea being floated by bar attorney Karen Hudis. According to Ms. Hudis and others of her ilk, our lawful government is an interregnum, a sort of legal coma, caused by Lincoln's declaration of a state of emergency, which has been declared every year since then by his successors. Let's make this perfectly clear. The only office of, quote, president that Lincoln could hold was that of a commercial corporation CEO. This is because bar attorneys have been prohibited from holding any public office in our government since March 12, 1819, and Abraham Lincoln was a bar attorney. Commercial corporations have no ability to declare war, nor even states of emergency, except in the euphemistic sense that their corporation is in trouble. Lincoln was not eligible as a bar member to hold the actual lawful public office of President of the United States of America, so that the only kind of, quote, president he could be was the President of the United States Trading Company. His assumption of the public office of Commander-in-Chief was an act of fraud, treason, and violation of international law. The perpetrators have tried to paper over this retroactively by adopting our lawful Constitution as the basis for their corporate articles of incorporation, published as the Constitution of the United States of America, 1868. They have tried by this means to enclose our Constitution for their own use, and they have tried via that means to unlawfully convert the actual office of the Commander-in-Chief to a private corporate office merely called the Office of the Commander-in-Chief. The fact remains that this is pure lawless fraud fomented by the bar, the British monarch, and the Roman pontiff in gross breach of trust against the American states and people. You can't take a sow's ear and transform it by calling it a silk purse. It remains a sow's ear just the same, and you can't take a declaration of a state of emergency made by a private foreign corporation and transform it into anything related in any way to us or to our lawful government. I have news for Karen Hudis and all other bar attorneys responsible for this circumstance. There is no interregnum and no effect on us or our lawful government by anything said, done, or claimed by the filthy foreign organization in Washington, D.C. in 1860 or any time since. It was a fraud then, and it is a fraud now. See this and over 700 others on his website. Spell the domain ANNAVO on our EITZ.com and click on PayPal. Ford and Carter's Bicentennial, or Stop Being Stupid, Part 27, reading from AnnaVonReitz.com. While we were all celebrating America's bicentennial back in 1976, enjoying all sorts of quaint colonial dramas and fireworks displays, historical reenactment, and even Broadway plays about the Founding Fathers, Gerald Ford and Company were quietly observing their own celebration by corrupting and co-opting and commandeering what was left of our court system. Meet the Foreign Sovereign Immunities Act as summarized by Wikipedia. The Foreign Sovereign Immunities Act, FSIA, of 1976 is a United States law codified at Title 28, subsection 1330, 1332, 1391, 1441D, 1391F, 1441D, and 1602 through 1611 of the United States Code that establishes the limitations as to whether a foreign sovereign nation or its political subdivisions, agencies, or instrumentalities may be sued in U.S. courts, federal or state. It was signed into law by President Gerald Ford on October 21, 1976. This law makes it very difficult for us to sue them in courts that were ultimately paid for by us. Sweet. So we pay for the courts and the judges and the police, and when the, quote, United States citizens or the citizens of the United States presume that we are citizens too, and we are too ignorant or deluded to forcefully disabuse them of their presumptions, they can haul us into courts paid for by us and hold us accountable to their private law, and they can charge our trust accounts for any violations and can use police forces paid for by us to haul us off to jails paid for by us. But we cannot use our common law, our federal postal district courts, according to them, to pay them the same compliment in return. This is how they always attempt to claim sovereign immunity. To stuff this down their throats requires you to know that they are not a sovereign government of any kind with respect to you, but are in fact nothing but one or another species of government corporation, see 31 U.S.C. 9101, engaged in commercial transactions under the guise of operating a lawful court. It also requires us to remember that we, the people in our states, retain the international land jurisdiction. We didn't ever delegate the international land jurisdiction to the United States Incorporated, nor did we delegate all of our powers on the sea. These reserved powers are the powers that we must invoke to bring these criminals to justice. The Clearfield Doctrine was handmade to ratchet open their throats on this issue, and basically says that when a government descends to the level of a commercial corporation and operates as such, it is owed no sovereignty and has no special rights or indemnities. It is subject to all the same rules and limits as any other commercial corporation. If you can't be tried by the J.C. Penney Corporation Court, neither can you be tried by the District Court of Columbia Municipal Corporation District Court. That's your immunity from prosecution in a nutshell, so pay attention. A few years earlier, another Immunities Act was passed, the International Organizations Immunities Act, IOIA, on December 29, 1945, during the last gasps of the Second World War. The overt intent of the law was to exempt some special groups, including the United Nations and various foreign government-related organizations, from obeying United States law, a sort of diplomatic immunity applied to whole organizations instead of specific people. It will no doubt come as a surprise to you, to most of you, that your name, written in all capital letters, styled as all capital letters, is being used as the same name of an international organization, and it is accepted under the IOIA, so that all capital letters YOU can engage in all sorts of unsavory and licensed activities. Great. That explains how all capital letter I, quote, DBA Anna Maria Reitz, styled as all capital letters, was supposedly running a rum distillery in Barbados according to the IRS master file attached to, quote, my name. At the same time, I was actually at home in Alaska running an art gallery. These unspeakable vermin have had us running around the world doing all sorts of criminal and licensed activities for them, and then exempting us from the law so they can benefit from our bad behavior as drug runners, privateers, arms dealers, booze manufacturers, and all the rest. Obviously, this is a crime syndicate operation in which they are using our good names and our identities to do evil which they benefit from at our expense, and all without our knowledge. The rats were gearing up that day in December of 1945 to rape and pillage the rest of the world in the wake of World War II, and do it in our names, so that when and if they got caught, we'd be blamed for it. Nice. Notice to the rest of the world, I have never run a rum distillery in Barbados. Never even visited Barbados. These criminals have stolen my name and identity for their own profit, and have charged against my credit and falsely claimed that my name and estate were standing as sureties for their debts. This is your notice that I have been defrauded, and because I have been defrauded, so have you. The master file kept on, quote, my name by the Internal Revenue Service is nothing but hot air, and you can bet that there are at least 390 million other such master files being kept, quote, in the name of, in quote, other Americans that are also nothing but hot air. There's enough bullpoopy in Washington District of Columbia to float battleships down Pennsylvania Avenue. But these false claims against our names and estates are the worst, most venial, most despicable examples of all. It isn't bad enough for these monsters to indebt the current generation. They have to extend their greed and false claims to generations yet unborn, willingly condemning babies to enslavement while tooting about America, the land of the free. They need to be recognized as the traitors and the liars and the criminals that they are, unmasked and disgraced, and most of all, stopped. Anyone with a brain should know that there is no possible basis for these monsters to indebt and thereby enslave anyone, much less babies yet to be born. It is considerably past time that all these victims of crimes rose up and brought the careers of these would-be slave masters to an end. Also past time that our names and estates were returned to our ownership and control, free and clear of any encumbrance, debt, fee, title, or any other imposition from any commercial corporation whatsoever, including the UN Corporation. In 1980, Jimmy Carter oversaw the transfer of our birth certificates to the International Monetary Fund as security backing the debts of the United States Incorporated, including the article "the" styled as all capital letters. In this way, we became the presumed chattel of the UN Corporation. Jimmy didn't care that every single document was executed under conditions of fraud and non-disclosure and against the interest of little babies in their cradles. He was content that they should all be enslaved and defrauded and made to pay the debts of the United States Incorporated, styled as all caps, a private, mostly foreign-owned corporation in the business of providing governmental services. Jimmy Carter could have provided housing for the entire known world on a fraction of what he spent against future generations of Americans while he was in office. That puts his work on behalf of Habitat for Humanity in perspective, doesn't it? This now completes the circle and tells you how it is that we now have UN personnel guarding our southern border. They aren't talking about the United Nations chartered in 1945. They're talking about the UN Corporation, a different beast entirely. See this and over 700 other articles, essays on his website. The domain name is spelled ANNAVONREITZ.com.